All right, so it is 7:01, so we can officially start. We have some other people that come in late. I know there are a couple of people that can't make it tonight because of work stuff that they have to do. Some people got stuck late in the office. So that's why we have the recordings going, and it's recording right now. So we can get started. So before I forget any of these things, let's do that one first. Let's see. Let me find, I have to find an image that's not here. So let me go up into, whoops, sorry. Let me go up into the library, go to all my photographs, and I'm going to just choose a missing photograph. And for some reason, all of my 9/11 shots. So yes, you can gather from what you see here on my screen, not that I meant to bring this up today, but I was here. I was here when I was working in the city when this happened, and I wasn't working that far away. But this image is missing because it's got the little exclamation point next to it. So I'm going to guess I moved it, or this is a low res copy that I probably used for something else. So let's see if we can find it. So how do we find? Yeah. Okay. By the way, you guys can talk freely for now. I'm going to mute you. If you have any questions, just go put it in the chat window. Okay, so back to this shot. How do we find it? Well, the keyboard shortcut is Command or Control R, which is Show in Finder right here under Photo. That's the menu part of it. So if I hit Command R, that will say I can't find the image, and because here's where it used to be and it's not there anymore. So here's where you do the copy and paste thing. Simply click and drag over top of the name of the file. Now you don't have to do this, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier to find it, and then copy it. This is the standard copy paste. If you're on a Mac, it's Command C, Command V, and on a Windows machine, it's Control. So I'm on a Mac, so I hit Command C and then click on Locate. Then it just brings me out to my computer. And in the window, I have the search window. Now I'm going to hit Command V, which is paste, and that will put it into that window. And son of a gun, here's the image. So I had moved it from one of the 8 terabyte drives to my Seagate 5.2, which is, I hate to say it, the Seagate 5.2 is kind of my computer junk drawer. It's miscellaneous things that I don't know where to put them. So, but there's the image. It found it. So now I just click select, and it'll go down into here, and now the exclamation point is gone. Now, for some reason, some of the neighboring images are not reconnecting. Let's see if some did. Nope, for some reason they aren't. So let's try one more. Yeah, here's a full res one drawing in. And if I hit Command left bracket, that will rotate it. I don't know why it's taking such a long time to draw, but anyway, it's taking a long time to draw because it doesn't have the file. So let's Command R that. Same thing. Select the name of the file, copy, locate, search button, paste. And let's see, and there it is. And it will tell you there we go. I have a image collections on my Seagate 5.2 for 9/11, and there it is. So I click select. The software, notice it's now able to draw it, and look, all of the images adjacent, except for this one and this one, all were found, because if it sees images that are nearby the one you just found, it will reconnect them for you. So there you go. Clear on that, Russ? Yes, no, yeah, I don't hear you because you're muted, but did that answer it, or just type it in the chat window? But yes, this was a disturbing day, and this is the North Tower. This is after the South Tower had already fallen, but you can actually see the outline of the plane right here. Lots of stories about that day. I'd rather not think about it tonight. But hopefully that answered your question. So let's go back to our collections. All right. What was the other question We did the copy and paste.
That was a question from Jane. Oh, Renee's question about tea.
Yes, I mentioned that earlier. We'll get to that. Do any of you, and by the way, just in the chat window, let us know, do any of you actually ever do any portrait photography? Because there are some things there are some operations in Lightroom that are somewhat peculiar to portrait photography that really do a good job with it. Strangely enough, though, they have applications in your landscapes too, and I'll actually show you an example where that happens. But let's start out with a waterfall. And do I have anybody here that hates flowing water and waterfalls? For some people, it's usually the engineers. For some reason, they have fits with this. And this is 1/5 of a second. So, which begs the question as a little sidebar, what's the shutter speed of our eyes? Anybody ever looked that up? From what I've read, it depends, but it's generally between 1/30th and 1/60th of a second. So we can't see water stopping with our own eyes. And so I don't have a problem with the flowing water. The thing I like about the flowing water is, if you think about it, photography is kind of the only medium that can show the passage of time in a single shot like this. So to me, that's pretty cool. So this is a place nearby to me. This is Dingman's Falls in Pennsylvania, right across Delaware River from us. And first, I want to do a basic edit, but then what we're going to spend most of our time tonight on is dealing with some of the more powerful capabilities of the masks. We touched on it last night, but we're going to go in a little bit deeper tonight. But let's take a look at the image. As far as exposure goes, look at the histogram up on the top here. Could that histogram be any better? No, it's right to the far right, but the little triangle, which is the highlight warning, is not lit up at all, which means there is nothing in here that's pure white. So there is no blown out highlights anywhere. If we kind of bring over the brightest spot, which seems to be down here, even that's 99.2, 99.2, and 99.1. And you can see those 3 numbers under the histogram, which means there's data there. And if we bring down the highlights, that's going to go with it. So we're safe there. The problem is in the shadows. The shadows are very dark. Let's bring up the shadows. All right, that's a help, but I want more. So what am I going to do? Bring down the highlights, because that gives us some headroom to be able to bring up the overall exposure. Now I'm going to make it lighter than I want it to end up being, because why? Because some of the other presence sliders are going to start to add some darkness to this. And I want to see where the colors are going. So I'm going to start right with the saturation, because this was an autumn day. And I want those fall colors to really pop. So, okay, that's a start. And now I'm working backwards a little bit, which brings up a point. Does it matter the order that you make your changes in Lightroom? And the answer is absolutely not. It doesn't care. There is no different effect. Unlike Photoshop, that has different effects happen if you change the order of how you do things. Lightroom, there is no difference. Why? Because in Lightroom, you're not actually doing anything. There is nothing on Lightroom that builds on another slider. It's all individual. And if you go into history over on the left-hand side, you can see here's all the things that I've changed so far. I could go back and undo any of these and the image is fine, because all it is doing is projecting on top of this built-in thumbnail of what it's going to look like when you do export it. That was the other question, exporting into Photoshop and the preferences. Now it's come back to me. So we'll get to that in a second. So anyway, let's go into presence. And presence is designed for adding some contrast and sharpening on edges. And it's not just sharpening, it's increasing the contrast between different colors. The difference between texture, clarity, and dehaze is how violent does that happen and how big a border does it create when it does that. So texture is very gentle. It's a very light sharpening, but very nice. Clarity, I generally go about half the amount in clarity. And again, this is something you experiment with. It's like seasoning your food. Do what makes sense to you. Dehaze is heavier duty. Be gentle with dehaze because it can cause a lot of destruction to your file when you export it, but it does add that little bit more pop. All right, so we have an image that's better. If I hit the backslash key, that's where we started and that's where we are right now, but it is still nowhere near where I want it to be. So what's going on? Well, first of all, the colors on either side and on the bottom are just still kind of dull. What tool do we want to use? Let's use the brush. So I'm going to hit K. No, I'm not going to. I'm going to undo that. I'm going to get rid of that one. Let's delete that one. Whoops. Oh, no, I deleted my whole file. There we go. Okay. I'm going to use a different mask because I want to show you some combinations of the mask. So let's go to mask and we're going to use a linear gradient, which is M. And I'm going to do the right side of the image and I'm going to cover all that. But I also want to get the tree down below. What is this? This is a rhododendron, right? And up top here. So I'm going to add to this with a brush. And if you go into the mask itself and click in here, you see you have add and subtract. So when I click add, it asks what tool do you want to use to add to it. So I'm going to use a brush and I want the brush to be on auto mask because I want it to pick up the green leaves of this. Yeah, it's going to go outside, color out the lines a little bit, but that's okay because it's going to fade off as it goes from where I'm clicking. And I'm just going around and clicking with the plus mark over top of the leaves. Now up on the top, I don't have to be that careful because I just want to capture all of this stuff. In fact, I'll even come down into the rock there. So now that we've got this, now we can adjust our saturation a lot up. I'm going to bring it way up. And I'm also going to bring the highlights down. All right. So I still, in my mind's eye, am seeing a slightly different color here. So let's change the color temperature as well. Now, this side of the image is being hit by the sun. So what does that mean? Well, it should be yellower than it is. So let's move over to yellow. And I'm actually going to bring the exposure down a little bit while opening up the shadows. All right, we're getting there. Does it need some magenta as well? Yeah, it does. That's what was missing. All right, now let's do the same thing for the left side of the image. So I'm going to create a new mask with a linear gradient again. And I'm going to come across. Now remember, from red to the black square fades from 100% to 50%, and from here from 50% to 0. So this piece on this last half of this gradient really doesn't have much of an effect on the image. So keep that in mind when you're adding and subtracting. Even though it's over the water a little bit down on the bottom, not a problem. In fact, if anything, I want to add in here a little bit more. So let's do that. I'm going to add with a brush again. This time I don't need the auto mask. So I'm going to slide up until I see auto mask and turn that off. And I'm just going to paint in here. Even some of these places that were missed before. All right, so now let's do the same for here. Let's bring up our saturation a bunch. Now the left side, since it was more in shadow, has lost some light. So we're going to bring up the exposure on that. Going to add some contrast. And tint-wise, I think it needs to be a little more orange too. So let's add some yellow and some magenta into that. And I'm happy where we're going. The rhododendron needs to be more green, so we're going to deal with that separately. So I'm just going to hit enter twice to get out of our masks, and we're going to go to use saturation luminance right here. And this is going to allow me to get to just the green in the leaves by clicking on saturation and getting the adjustment pointer. So I just center on one of the leaves, and you can actually see if you look at the green slider, it just got lit up on the right-hand side where it says 0. It's showing me that that's actually a pure green in those leaves. So if I click and push up, it's going to increase the saturation of just those leaves. And now I'm going to click on luminance and do the same thing. I'm going to add some light into these green. Don't want to make it unnatural. It's okay that it's still dark. Now there's something else going on color temperature wise. Look at the water. It looks like it has no color at all. It's almost like it's a black and white. And what would really be happening to water here compared to the foliage around it? My gut tells me that it would have a slightly more bluish tint to it than we're seeing because it's completely gray up here. Let's try that. Let's hit K again, get a new mask. We're going to turn on auto mask again so I can get a nice big brush. And I'm just going to brush down and back up all over the spots where I see some falling water, and even down in here. Now let's see what happens if we add a little bit of blue to this. A little bit of blue. Oh, it looks better already. Just the slightest smidge. And it also has the effect of separating itself out from the warmth of the foliage around it. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit too. Oh, that looks better. But I'm also going to bring the whites down a little bit and the highlights because I don't want any of the whites to clip, but I want to bring up the midtones of the foliage. One last thing, actually two last things. We're looking pretty good. Again, especially when you consider that's what we started with. If you remember a couple minutes ago, that's where we were. Here's where we are now. This image needs a vignette. So we go to Effects, Vignette. And I'm going to add a little bit more than I normally do. Now let's talk about the composition. What does this image need to make it better? What are the problems? Well, where do you want the viewer to look? To me, the falls are still the star and the surrounding foliage is a supporting character in this. So is there a little too much above the top of the falls? I think the answer is yes. And maybe on the left-hand side as well. So let's get the cropping tool, which is R. Or you can click on this thing here. If you let it hover over top of it, eventually it comes up and it says R for crop. So I thought there was too much on the top. I think something more like that, and too much on the left. We don't need all of that. And maybe a little too much on the right too. And as I'm doing this, is that shape starting to look familiar to you guys? Yeah, I think it's one of two things. This is either my legal or it's a 16:9. I think this is a legal size, which I just happen to have a printer that does this. Let's take a look if I go to custom and take a look at my legal size paper, which is 14:8.5. It didn't even, it moved a very little smidge right there. That's the technical term. It was a smidge, schmidge. And I hit enter and much better. I, however, have decided I'm not done. I want to do a little more light painting on this thing to add some more interest to it. So I'm going to get a brush. Again, we're going to get our K for the brush. This is all going to be non-auto mask. This is burning and dodging. I don't know if, I'm sure some of you guys used to work in a darkroom where you'd use your hands to, as you're making your print and do a little dance over top of the print. We're going to do that right now. I'm going to lighten that up. Let's see, I'm going to lighten up into the falls a little bit and down here as well. Let's bring that up a little bit. So bring the exposure up so that it looks the way I want. And I'm going to add some contrast and I'm going to increase the blacks a little bit. And then conversely, I'm going to darken over here. So I hit K for a new brush. And over there, I think that's it. I'm going to darken that a little bit. And I'm still not happy with as much light as I've got. So I'm going to hit K again because I want to lighten this area up even more. Typically, I don't want to lighten the bottom, but in this case, for some reason, it needs it. So I'm going to do it with the shadows first. And I'm just going to increase the overall exposure. Oh, looks so much better already. There we go. I think I can be done. Let's hit enter on that twice. And again, if we go back to where we started, that was the raw file. That's showing it after the crop, but that's the raw file we started with. And I'll show you full screen. That's what we ended up with. There's only one thing I didn't do, and I did not do a sharpening on it. So let's go ahead back to do that. Let's go to detail. And again, this little square, you can put it on something. I'll put it on some of the brush out here. I'm going to sharpen it a lot. And I'm going to guess some of the brush in the back is going to be slightly out of focus because this is 1/5 of a second and there was a breeze this day. I could, if I wanted to see better, maybe if I came up here on the rhododendron, sharpen that, but hold down Alt, click on masking, because we don't want to sharpen everything. I don't want the water itself to be sharpened because there is really not a lot of detail in it. And if I try to sharpen it, it's just going to add green to it. And I think we're done. I think that looks great. And there's our final image. Not too shabby. Let's move on. Let's do something different. We haven't done any birds. Any birders out there? Any of you guys birders? If you're a bird, most of the people that are birders that have dealt with me realize that I love making fun of birders. Because birders crack me up. Okay, so I do love birds. Don't get me wrong, but you know, I'm not one of those people that walks around with a $10,000 lens taking pictures of sparrows, which I've seen people do, by the way. And they're all very miserable while they're doing it. That's the sad part. So anyway, lovely seagull. I can't remember. I think this is actually in Newport, Rhode Island. Interesting short depth of field to make everything in the back kind of really go out of focus, which is nice because it's going to allow us to focus on the bird. But we need to fix some of the basics. So let's go to basics. But what do we need to fix? Well, let's bring up the shadows because the shadows are dark. The highlights are actually not too bad. We'll bring them down a bit. And I'll add the little bit of texture clarity. I don't think we need any dehaze here because that's going to deal with this. And we'll add some saturation and vibrance just to kind of start to get things in the right place. And actually, as I'm looking at it, it needs more contrast. Oh, that makes the rocks look so much better. So I'm happy with the background for the most part, although there's a little bit too much of it. Now we need to isolate the bird. Now, in the new masking panel, it actually has a thing called subject. Do we think that Lightroom can find the seagull by itself? Let's find out. So I'm going to just click on subject and see what Lightroom comes back with. And you have to admit, that's pretty impressive. Skynet is here and it's taking over. So that's pretty darn good. It picked up a little bit in between the legs off in the distance, but the stuff we're going to do to this probably not going to be affected. What does it need? We need to bring the exposure up a bit. We need to bring it up a lot. You know, just imagine that. Actually, no, not imagine anything. That actually looks great. And while we're there, I'm going to add some more texture in, which is a nice bit of fine sharpening for something like this. And I see really just kind of 3 places more that I want to do a little bit more editing on the bird itself. So let's go to 100% up here in the navigator and bring this up to the face of the bird. So I'm going to get a brush and we need to turn auto mask back on again. I'm going to make my brush nice and small, and I'm going to select just the beak. Yes, it gets out a little bit. We'll fix that in a second. I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the eye. We'll do the legs separately. Now, rather than going up here and going to subtract, there's a shortcut for that, which is the Alt key. And the Alt key is the magic thing in all things Adobe. It usually does something. So if I hit Alt, it automatically turns my brush to a minus. So I'm going to make it small and just drag it around these spots that went outside of the bill. And there we go. So what do I want to do? I want to brighten it up a little bit. So let's bring up the exposure. Let's add a bunch of yellow. Oh, that looks better. Some of you guys are birders might be telling me, well, the beaks aren't really that yellow. Yeah. Tough. I like it. It's my bird. You color it the way you want. So same thing with the legs. Now we have this live. This is active. We haven't turned it off yet. And the way I can show that is hit the O key, which will show me the overlay. And it's showing that that's still there. What I can do is add to this. I can just drag the navigator window down to the legs. I still have auto mask turned on, And I can just paint over this, and notice what it does is it just does it on the fly. I can just, since auto mask is on, it pretty much stays inside the legs. And as I look at it, I'm sure if there are birders there, I'm sure there's always birders around, that you think, well, maybe that's a little too yellow. You might be right. So what can I do? I still have this live. We're still looking at it with the mask. I can just bring the saturation down a smidge. If you think that looks a lot more realistic, I actually really couldn't argue with you. That looks better. Hit enter, Z to unzoom, and look at our bird now. So now we really just have a compositional issue, and that's how to crop this image. In my mind's eye, I kind of see this as a 16:9 horizontal. Let's take a look. Let's try a 16:9. And I think that's actually pretty darn good. Why? Why did I choose to do that? Well, take a look. Let me undo that. Notice how big this thing is up here. There's just too much of the out of focus ocean coming in, and it's a distraction from the animal. You don't want other elements that are not necessarily contributing to what's going on, or they aren't all needed to contribute, to overpower the subject. That's why cropping is important. And be merciless in your cropping. Take no prisoners. And the beauty of cropping in Lightroom is you're not actually cropping. You're not actually going to be applying the crop until one of two things happen. You export it into Photoshop, or you send it out to a printer and then it gets built in, or you export it to a JPEG to put online. You can't actually edit a raw file in Lightroom, which means the crop can always be changed. And the beauty of the crop, in fact, let's go ahead and add a vignette. I'm going to add one a little heavier than usual. Something about like that. The beauty of the vignette in Lightroom is, notice it's called post-crop vignette. Why? Because it follows the crop. So how we can see the vignette. I'll turn it on and off for a second. You can see it's a little heavier than I would do. I just did that so you can see it easily. If I change the crop now to that 16:9, which I think is an appropriate shape for it, there are more shapes that are appropriate for this as well, and hit enter, guess what? That crop, that vignette has followed the new crop. Watch as I turn it on and off, and you can see it moved with the crop. That's why I always do my cropping here in Lightroom. Now, that said, are there other crops available for this? Sure. Actually, if anybody wants to put in the chat, what do you think would be the crop here? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to make two virtual copies, which is just Command or Control apostrophe, which will make two basically copies of the thumbnail. And we're going to try just a couple of different crops. So I hit the R key. What else could work here? Well, we've got plenty of room where the animal's looking off to the right. I'm going to make it even more. Let's see what a 2:1 does. Now, I don't have 2:1 listed in my custom crops. I have 3:1. Why? Because 3:1 is actually a standard frame size. You can buy those in both Michael's and Hobby Lobby. 2:1 is not. They're actually kind of harder to find, but we're going to make a 2:1. So I simply go into Enter Custom and tell it I want it to be 2:1 and hit OK. And there's a 2:1, which is more of a panoramic feel. So let's take a look at that. I don't not like it. Is that a good sentence? I don't not like it. No, I'm going with that. There's a little too much over here. So that's fine. We created some other copies. Let's try something else. Could we do this as an 8:10? Oh, don't make me make an 8:10. I hate 8:10s, but fine. Let's see what an 8:10 looks like. Oh, it's dreadful. That is that. Here's why Joe hates 8:10s. I have some unresolved issues, apparently. The problem with an 8:10 is it is almost square, but it's not. And 8:10 has virtually no movement to it. A square image has no movement. Let's make it a square, which is actually a better option than 8:10. Here's a square. So if I go ahead and crop this as a square image says, here's a thing. You look at it, and then you leave. There's no motion to it. You look kind of in the dead center. It's great for a single subject. I mean, this might work fine in somebody's bathroom in their beach house. This would be great for that. But there's no motion to it because it's just a single thing. Again, it's an option. Up two more crops. Let's go the other way. Could this be a vertical crop? What do you think? Let's hit R. Let's take it the other way. I'm going to turn off the lock on 1 by 1, and I'm just going to go vertical with it. And the answer is no, it doesn't work as a vertical. There's just not enough there. Can we go some intermediate? How about something, forget the official sizes. You really want the image to be the best it can be, and you're not going to get stuck with a standard frame size. You're going to spend the money on the custom framing. To me, something like that's probably the best framing. Why? Because the animal is big. Yes, the eye's in the center, but the animal's off to the left-hand side. And the general rule of thumb is, it's not a rule, it's a suggestion, is whichever way the animal is facing or looking, there needs to be some room in front of it, because that conveys the sense of, if the thing's going to move, it's going to go that way. So that's what's going to happen in the future. So that's the beauty of virtual copies in Lightroom. In fact, I'm going to go back to our first one and reset it. And I'll come out to our virtual copies. Let's take a look. Full frame. Whoops. Go back to that. There's our raw file that we started with. There's kind of the more pano edit, the 2:1. There's the square. And there's the custom one. And that's the fun thing about virtual copies. By the way, this was taking time drawing in. It's just coming. It just came in now. You might have seen some color in the bottom white of the animal. It's because Lightroom was still drawing it in. So when you see those artifacts, they're not there. Just give them a minute. Any questions? Any questions, son?
Square.
Square. The question is square. Oh, somebody suggested square. Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you like the square, that's fine. Here's where the square would work. This would work as a small image. If this was something, because part of the problem is there's really, I don't think there's enough underneath the animal. Yeah, we really could use a little bit more down here to make this a square. It's a little too close to the bottom because I can't crop in really anymore, maybe a little bit. Let's see. If I just wanted to make it really a photograph of that just says, here's a seagull. And if you just go and you just want to show the bird up close, well, that's fine. That works. You could do that. One other thing I'm going to do, and here's something else interesting. You're going to find your light painting is going to change depending on your crop, because it's how you want to have the viewer interact with the image. So in this case, I want to send the viewer up to the head of the bird, to where the eye is. So let's hit K. Get our brush. I think I'm just going to make it and not auto mask. We're just going to kind of paint with some light here. And I'm going to create a swath across that way. Here's our swath. And I'm going to bring up the exposure on that part of the image. Let's put some blacks back in. I don't want to lose all my shadow areas. And I'm going to sharpen it up a little bit too, with some more clarity. And when I do that, that needs some shadows opened up a little bit. And I'll hit enter on that. And let's look at it full screen. So does that work as a square? Sure, it does. It's kind of a decorative photograph of a seagull. And again, if I had a beach house, I would certainly hang this in there. These make nice, to me, between 8 by 8 and 12 by 12 images. If it was any bigger than that, it would just look like a giant seagull. It's really all about the bird and not about the environment, unlike the others. So again, we're going off into composition rather than Lightroom, but to me, the editing changes with the composition. Since a square is just look at the subject, that's what it's for. It also changes where the eye goes. And since the animal is now bigger, I needed to brighten up the head area to make sure your eye went to the animal's eye. Any questions, Di? Okay. Let's go somewhere different. Let's take a trip out west. All right. This is a place called Balanced Rock. This is in Arches National Park. And this thing's actually pretty big. I don't know if there's any people over here as we zoom around. No, no people here. By the way, we always do our trips to Moab. Our favorite time to do it is in January because the weather is lovely. Uh, Anywhere, we will in the mornings, we will have some upper 20s, but in the middle of the afternoon, it's 45 to 50 degrees in January and very little snow there. It's a desert. So a great time to go. But this is one of those times where it's very yellow, reddy, orangey dirt around here. It's not showing up in this image yet. And the greens have almost been canceled out. So this is one of those images where we're going to have that problem. And whoever asked about color grading, we'll see if it'll work in this image. I'm not optimistic, but we'll try it. So I'm going to make myself a virtual copy first. And what are the problems? Well, again, you look at the histogram up top, the histogram's perfect. The exposure is really as good as it can be because it was critical to save these clouds. We cannot have the white in the clouds clipping. So it is what it is. Let's bring up the shadows just all the way. We'll bring the highlights down to allow us to bring up the midtones a little bit. And okay, now we're starting to see a little bit of life in it. I'll go ahead and add my texture clarity. Dehaze, no, I don't think so. And we'll add a bunch of vibrance. That'll bring back the sky. And then the saturation will bring down the foreground. And there's the red. That's what was missing. I've always mentioned that when you do this, the skies, when you have to bring in a lot of color back in, the skies have a tendency to shift. I don't know. Do I have I have a custom profile for this. We haven't talked about that. Let me see what happens when we do our custom profile. Oh, look at that. Okay. I think it's time to talk about profiles. Hold on. I got to find a picture of the color checker. You know what? We'll come back to that. If you've ever seen the color checker passport, I will bring it up and I'll show you how it works. But what a color checker does is, hold that thought. What a color checker does, it is a set of colors that the software knows what all the colors are on that target. And by having that information in the software, it creates what's called a custom camera profile, because every camera captures color differently. You would think there would be standards for at least what red, green, and blue are. And the answer is there are not. And what a color checker allows you to do is to have a set of standard colors that you can shoot out in the environment that will overcome that. And I'm scrolling down quickly. Look, I know I took some pictures of the color checker out here. Let me see if I can find one. Lots of panos. You've seen the thing. Oh, you know what? I know I have one in my portrait folder. So I'm not going to apply it to this image. Obviously, I already have it. Let me go back to my collections. Okay, here's the one we're working on. Since we're going to do teeth, I'll go back to here's my portraits folder. And I could have sworn I put a color checker in there. Never mind. When we take a break at 8 o'clock, I'll find the damn color checker. Pardon my French. But anyway, what a color checker does is it creates what's called a custom camera profile. And what that does is take a picture of it in this environment, and then the software looks at it and sees the red, green, and blue and all the other colors plus the white balance. And it calculates out, well, I'm supposed to be seeing red here, but I'm not. I'm seeing it's got too much blue in it. The preset, the custom profile fixes for that. Well, I obviously have in the develop module under profile, Adobe Color is the standard conversion. And the first thing that Adobe Color costs you dearly are blues when it converts your raw file over to something it can work with. And that's what's happening here. When you do a custom profile with a color checker, as I spelled daylight wrong, but this was shot with a Fuji XS10. When I created a profile for this, look what happens to the colors. Now the sky looks like the sky. In fact, it fixed it so much that I don't need as much saturation. because now it fixed the colors to the correct color. Now, the exception again, remember your camera can only capture one color temperature. But notice the life of I didn't even touch the greens individually, but they have come back a lot. That is because of the custom profile. And when we come back from our break, I'll dig that out. I'll have it ready for you. So what else do we need to do to this image to make it work? We've got some shadow issues down in here. Can we do it globally, or do we have to get a brush and pick them out individually? Let's find out. If you remember, the keyboard shortcut for a linear gradient is M. So we hit M on our keyboards, and I will click and then drag up. I just want to make sure my 50% line is kind of about at the horizon. So I'm going to bring up the exposure more again for the foreground and even more for the shadows. And now it's starting to look right. While we do this, there's a lot of details in this stone and dirt here. So let's go ahead. We'll add some clarity, which darkened our shadows again. So we're going to have to add some more exposure. There's a little bit of a tug and war going on here. And I think it needs a little saturation too. I've been here a lot of times and this stuff is pretty red. Something like that. All right, so that has helped. The problem is the greens are still not quite there. So we're going to have to get a brush, which is K. If you remember, we scroll up till we hit auto mask. And let's go ahead. I'm just going to go around and click on these things that I know to be green. These things in front aren't particularly green. I don't know what they're called, but I know they're not that green. All right. So I want to add some green to those things. And it looks like I'm working sloppily. It really isn't, because the thing bleeds over into other parts of the image. It's very subtle and it makes the blending work. So what does green mean? Well, it means I need some more blue. And it means I need some more green. And that's kind of what the green looks like. So I hit enter on that. So what else? I just noticed this past year, there's a face on this rock. Do you see that? We go up to the rock. It's actually kind of a face in there. Anyway. Composition wise, what do you guys think? Do you like it that way? Yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. Does it need more? If you think it needs more, give me a thumbs up. You already know the answer is it needs more. Yes, of course it does. So I'm going to make 3 virtual copies. And again, this comes back to, where do I want the viewer to look? This is kind of cool. Nothing really much going on there, but in composition, it really pays to have 3 things. And we've got a grouping of 3 here. 1, 2, 3. We also have these leading lines from this exposed rock where the sand is washed away, leading us right to balanced rock. So how can we help those things along? Well, do we need all the sky above the rocks? I don't think so. So let's just start by cropping that down. And do we need all of the bottom? Because here's the other thing. In the height of the image, we have from here to here, that's balanced rock. And that's the primary piece to look at. Well, this bit of exposed rock here is big or slightly bigger than this is. It's competing. It needs to be cut back a little. So let's trim back on that. We still have it. We just got rid of some of it. Do we want, it's getting close to center. Do I need this little piece down here? I don't think so. Let's crop in just a little bit, say right to there. And there's this big thing over here. I don't know what it is. Let's bring that in as well. And let's hit enter on that. All right, looking better, but there's still, we still need to do some light painting on this. Let's cut to the chase, and I'm going to back off on the vignette a little bit, but let's get some light going in here. So let's hit K and auto mask. And I want to lighten up this primary rock. I'm just going to click and drag down it. I'm going to leave the other 2 alone. This is the one I want you to go to. So I'm going to bring up the exposure a bit here. I'm also going to make it a little yellower. Let's see what happens when we do that. Make it a little yellower. And I'm going to take a little red out of it. I'm going to make this one a little yellow. I kind of remember it being a little more yellow. All right, it could just be me. I'm going to hit K again. This time I'm going to turn off auto mask. So what happens when I turn off auto mask? Well, if I turn off auto mask, then everything that's within that circle gets affected the same way. If I have auto mask on, it only selects things that match what's underneath that plus sign. So I want it to pick up everything. I want to get this area right here to help me create a path up to here. So there's our mask. Let's bring up the exposure. And I'm going to bring it up more than I need because I'm going to turn the highlights down. And it creates a subliminal path. Now I made it a little too light. And here's what I find. If you want to create just the right amount of light to lead to a subject, don't look at it. Look off to one side and look with your peripheral vision until you can see it starting to happen. Once you see it starting to happen, that's a good amount. Now, I also want to lighten up some other areas, but not that much. So with this live, what I can do is just come to flow, drop my flow down, and keep painting. And this will work at a lower power. And I can lighten up some of these other areas that I thought got a little too dark. And I think that's enough. I don't think I need to mess with it anymore. Let's just hit enter on that. And let's take a look and see where we've come. So there's our raw file that we started with. And there's our image. I haven't done any sharpening on this, but do we need to do anything else? No, I think this really kind of works the way we were dealing with it. Any questions? All right. Let's do one more before we take a break for getting up. Let's see. What do we want to do? Yeah, let's save that one for after the break. Let's see. Do you guys want, or I'll give you the choice. Do you want a landscape or do you want another bird? Whoever types in first gets to pick. And the winner is? Nope. Anybody? Nobody wants to vote? Bird. Okay.
No, that was, sorry.
What?
Brooke put in lighthouse.
Lighthouse. That wasn't even one of the choices. Well, that's all right. That was specific. That's fine. You want a lighthouse? You get a lighthouse. Let's pick a lighthouse. Which one do we want to do? There's my color checker. I did have one in here. That's a color checker. So this is one of the greatest tools you can have. Spend the money and get one of these. I take it with me everywhere I go. These colors are known. It's a gray ramp from white to black with grays in the middle. Look, here's red, green, blue, CMYK, the two basic color spaces, and then two other rows of colors that reflect colors that appear in nature. It's not all of them. But what happens is when you take a picture of this thing, the software looks at it and it knows what the values for all these patches are. It then looks at it and let's say blue is looking a little bit too, I don't know, it's got too much, let's say green in it. The software looks at that and says, well, there should be 5 points less green in there. It then subtracts that when it applies the profile. So basically a profile is a set of corrections. It's the same thing when you calibrate your monitor. Let's go up to the develop module here and into the basic. Now, these again are known values. This is what Adobe Color gave us of this target. Now we can white balance first if we want. Click the white balance target. I could technically pick any of these. I'll pick this one. And well, there, now the white balance is good. Is the color good now? Is white balance enough? And the answer actually is no. Because remember, our raw files are coming in from our cameras. The camera manufacturers won't actually tell Adobe the data coming off their sensor. They leave it up to Adobe to reverse engineer everything for things coming into their software. So they make compromises. And the Adobe Color is the first place in your journey through a digital color workflow that is costing you tons of color. It really is not a very good conversion as far as color goes. So to create a profile, it's extremely simple. You take a picture of the thing where you are. You go up to File, Export with Preset. You obviously install the software for the color checker. Click on that and give it a name. And I didn't even look this up. This is RAF. Oh, this is a Fuji file. I'm just going to call it Fuji Daylight. I don't know what camera it is, but the beauty is profiles are camera specific. So if I have an image taken with a camera other than this, it just won't even show up in the listing. So I told it to make me a custom profile. That's it. Take a picture of the thing. It has to be a raw file. It needs to be decent size in the screen. Go up to that preset and say, make me a profile. You can see in the upper left here, it says it's processing profile. Takes 30 to 45 seconds. Then it's going to come back with a message saying you need to restart Lightroom for Lightroom to see the profile. Well, that's okay. Actually, it isn't okay. I don't even know what camera this is. It's a different one. Because notice I only have the Adobe presets in here. And by the way, these are all universally terrible. They're dreadful. In fact, if we chose landscape, look, it gets really super cartoonishly saturated. Portrait is desaturated. Again, see, here's the message. Lightroom has to be restarted. We hit OK. And then vivid is, it ends up being cartoonish. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and restart Lightroom. So I have to quit it. And we'll skip the backup. And then we'll just restart it again. And then when we restart it, the profile we just created for this will show up. So let's go back to Lightroom. Why do I keep getting all these screenshots on my, it's like the software is automatically taking screenshots every once in a while. Maybe I'm leaning against some key that I didn't realize. Okay, so this will take us right back to where we left off. And here's the color checker image. It's just rebuilding everything. Give it a second. And then we'll get to our lighthouse. All right, so here's the Adobe Color. Now, when we click in there, we can go to Browse. And I have to go to Profiles and Fuji Daylight. Here's the one we just created right there. So I'm going to use that one. I'm going to click on the star, which will make it a favorite, which means now it will show up in my standard profiles. So I can close this now. See, I have Fuji Daylight. Look at the Adobe Color. That's what Adobe was giving us. Look at the blues. And you saw what happened to the sky when we applied the profile. Adobe Color, Fuji Daylight. Did you see what just happened to all those colors? That is what the standard Adobe conversion into Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw is costing you. Spend the money for one of these things. I forget what they're going for now. See them on sale, 129, 149, something like that. It will save you so much time for your color editing because you create a profile for the location and then just apply it to all your images. And yeah, you're going to want to fine tune after that, but you will have a perfect starting point in color for all your images. There, I've said it. Okay, Lighthouse. Let's see, which lighthouse? Who wanted the lighthouse? Brooke wants a lighthouse. Brooke, is this lighthouse okay? Okay, this is called Sankaty Light. This is on Nantucket Island off the coast of Cape Cod. And what just happened? Back. The day was actually clearing up while we were here when this happened. But again, it was a matter of protecting the highlights. And if we look at the histogram, it's getting close, but there's nothing that's gone pure white. If your whites are in the low to mid 90s, that's good. If you're getting to 99, you're pushing your luck, but we're safe here. First problem before I do anything, the lighthouse is tilting. Got to fix that. So let's get the crop tool because I can't even think straight with the lighthouse not straight. So you add the crop tool, come to a corner, and you just start dragging it around. If it looks straight to your eyes, guess what? It's straight. The eye can see the finest little bit out. And I can also look at the lightning rod on top of the lighthouse. It's a kind of a good gauge. And also the side of the mirror tower there. And there we go. Okay, so now our lighthouse is straight. The foreground is really dark. We're going to have to deal with that separately. Let's just do some basics first. Let's bring up the shadows, and that helped. And we'll bring up the highlights. It's lacking in contrast and it's lacking in saturation. So let's do that and that. Now, the red of this lighthouse looks almost orange right now. It is not orange. It's a real red. So we're going to have to fix that separately. And also the lighthouse itself is a little bit on the dull side. Could have been because of the way the sun was hitting it. It was coming through clouds and maybe that cloud was a little thicker. So let's edit the sky first. So we'll click on our mask and choose sky. So there's our sky chosen. And look, it also picked up the bottom of the lighthouse because the white was almost the same. So we need to get rid of that. So we click on our mask, subtract, brush, and make sure auto mask is on. Oh, I don't have my flow all the way up because it was having trouble getting rid of it. Come on, back to my mask. Stop it. Brush. And I'm just subtracting it in there. I got a little bit too much. So again, we have subtract chosen. I need to put this back. So again, if I hold down the Alt key, it does just the opposite. It turns it back to plus so that we can edit our sky. Okay, there's our sky chosen. What does the sky need? Let's add some contrast, bring the exposure up a little bit. Needs certainly some color. Let's add saturation in. Don't like the color. Was this shot with the same camera? I don't know. Let's find out. I'm going to hit enter on this for a second. Let's take a look at the profile. And it was shot with the same camera. And did you see all the colors just shift? Again, one time, there's Adobe color. Here is the custom profile. Did you know the greens got lighter and the blues changed somewhat? So get yourself a color checker. All right, I'm fairly happy with the sky. I think they'll still think the hue is off. So let's go to HSL and fix that. I'm going to go into the blue here. I'm going to push it up to take it over to a little bit more of a blue. It was a subtle sky at this point in the day anyway, so that's fine. Now I want to work on the foreground. So let's go up to mask again, create new mask, and we're going to select the sky again. But we want everything but the sky. And this time it picked the bottom of the lighthouse, which was a good thing because we don't want to touch that either. But what we do now is next to the mask, you've got 3 dots here. If you click on that, you get a whole bunch of new options, and one of them is invert the mask, which gives us everything but the lighthouse. And now I have to get rid of this stuff. So I click on subtract again, get a brush. And I need to, let's see, yep, I'm going to turn off auto mask because I just want to completely get rid of the lighthouse up here. I just want to mess with the bottom. Okay, so now I've got that. Let's bring up the exposure. Let's add some clarity. And let's add some saturation. And that looks great. Now the problem is the lighthouse itself. Do you think the software will notice that is the subject? Don't know. I haven't tried it with this. Let's try it. So we'll choose select subject. Son of a gun, it knew the lighthouse was the subject. Isn't that amazing? Is anybody amazed by that besides me? It's scary. So what are the problems? Well, the white's kind of dull. Let's bring the white up. And I'm going to add a little more contrast because I want the black top of the lighthouse to stay that way. Saturation's off a bit. That red is still off. It's still too yellowy orange. We're going to have to deal with that separately. And I could use a brush and all that, but there's no need because that's something that HSL can do much better. So the hue is off. So let's click on that and see what happens. Oh, I had to go the other way. See there? That's the red. That's the color this thing is. And much better. Is my lighthouse straight? I'm going to stand back a little bit. I might be still a little off. Maybe I went too far. I think, right there. That looks better. Okay. So we'll add our vignette. And I'm actually pretty happy with that. Again, when you consider that's what no, that's not even what we started with. We'll create a virtual copy so we can put them side by side. Because we haven't talked about our crop yet. What do you guys think for a crop? Do you think it needs to be taller? Let's reset that. All right, there's what we started with. So here's our edit so far. Is it okay as it is? Maybe. I'm going to create a virtual copy so that we can compare. Let's see how our legal size looks for this. Oh, I like that. I like that better. Why do I like it better? Again, when you have a tall, thin crop like this, you're forcing the viewer to look at it. In this case, you're going to look at it from the bottom up and it just leads you right up the lighthouse. So let's take a look at the three of them. Let's start with our original raw file. We'll go full screen. Here's our slightly leaning lighthouse waiting for the sun to come out completely. Not quite there yet. There's our edit. And then here's our crop. And you see what I mean about that one little bit of crop, how it changes kind of the visual motion. When we go to there, we've got more stuff. We've got more of this that catches your eye and makes you look at it. By doing that one little bit of cropping, the lighthouse becomes a little more prominent in the image. And also, as I'm looking at it, I think I want a little more light right here. So let's come out of this. I'm going to get a brush with auto mask on, and I'm just going to paint kind of right there and bring up the exposure a smidge. There we go. That's what it needed. I think that looks better. Lovely. And if you look at the difference, see, it's just a little dull. Just by adding that little bit of light, it got more life in it. You like that? Yes, no? Yeah, good. Okay. Question. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have to take a picture for each situation, i.e. sun, cloudy, etc.?
Good question. So the question is, with the color checker passport, how many profiles do you need to create? Technically, you can get by with one. You can just create one daylight one, let the sun actually hit it, because what a profile is doing is it's figuring out how your camera sees color. How does it record red, green, and blue and all the other colors? So that will apply regardless, because the white balance is one piece, the profile is another. They are actually separate from each other. Because if you applied a color profile, in fact, let's do it to this image right now. If I go to basic here, I have my profile, but if I tell it that that was white, where I just clicked on the blue, the profile isn't going to help me. They work together. What the white balance does is it tells me what is neutral as a starting point. The profile then takes me through all the other colors. So there's the Adobe color. Here's the Adobe standard, which is a little duller. And then the actual daylight for the color. That said, do I create multiple profiles? Yes, I typically will create one for sun and one for cloud. Because when it's cloudy out, you're losing what color? You're losing red, because the red's being filtered out first, just like as if you were underwater. So I will do that just as a time saver. Sometimes all I need to have, as long as I have a profile, and this is a daylight, if I had a cloudy one, between that and whenever I'm out, I'll take a shot of the color checker so I have a white balance of the place, so that I have the combination of the white balance. I can then apply either the daylight or the cloudy profile. There'll be slight differences and everything will snap into place that way. So you don't have to take it all the time, but it really pays wherever you go to just take a shot of it for the white balance of the scene. Any other questions?
No.
Okay. All right. It's 8:06. It's time to get up and stretch your legs. And I don't have to go look for a color checker because we found one. So when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the preferences about exporting. We hadn't covered that. And we're going to start to delve into panoramics as well. Oh, and teeth. We'll do that right when I get back first. We'll deal with a portrait edit, and we'll deal with teeth and eyes, and we'll do skin as long as we're at it. All right. So let's take 5. But I think we can go ahead and get started. So let's do that. Now, what I want to do before we actually move into any more image editing is we had talked about preferences in Lightroom, which of course Adobe had to call settings. And this has to do with what I want to go over every one of these. That would get kind of boring, but under external editing, this is where you tell it what type of file you want Lightroom to create when it goes into external editing. So you have 2 choices, TIFF or PSD, which is a Photoshop file. Doesn't matter which one you pick. No, really doesn't. Really, the only PSD is a little bit smaller file because of the way Photoshop saves files. TIFF does not have a size limit. PSDs do. I believe the size limit on PSDs right now for a single image is 1.5 gigs, which sounds like a ridiculous amount of size for a single image. But when you start dealing with panoramics, I have had images go over 1.5 gigs. So then they have to be TIFFs. Color space. You might have noticed there was no mention of color space anywhere in Lightroom previous to this. That's because you don't have control over color space in Lightroom. Lightroom always works in the biggest color space available to it, which is ProPhoto RGB. It's actually a variant of ProPhoto RGB. If there's any engineering geeky people out there, it's called Lisa RGB. It's a slightly different color curve than ProPhoto, but it's the same space. Adobe RGB we've all heard of. Display P3 is the new kid on the block. We'll talk about that in a second. sRGB. Now, people have for years poo-pooed sRGB. Oh, it's a small color space. It's no good. Blah, blah, blah. Guess what? The vast majority of monitors and every lab printer that uses conventional lab chemistry works in sRGB. So that's the colors you've been living with your whole life anyway. The only way you get more than sRGB out on a print is when you go out to some kind of inkjet printer. And inkjet printers can do somewhere in between Adobe RGB and ProPhoto RGB. So the rule you should follow with this, everything that you have while it's in Lightroom is already in basically ProPhoto RGB. So you're safe. It's only when you export. But you should always export in the biggest color space available because you can always go down. But if you export it lower, you can't go back up because then the color is gone. Now, again, most of you can't see the difference between sRGB and Adobe RGB unless you have a specific Adobe RGB monitor. And if you did, you'd know it because you paid a lot more for it. They generally start at about $750 to $800. Now, then there's this new kid on the block called Display P3. This came out a couple of years ago. I think Apple was behind it. All the Apple monitors, the color space is Display P3. It's kind of in between sRGB and Adobe RGB, closer to Adobe RGB. It's more designed for video. It has a slightly different contrast curve to it and color curve to it because everybody's watching videos on YouTube and streaming stuff and all that. So Apple kind of went to the video world on it. It's fine. It's a fine color space, but should you ever export to it? No, not unless you're creating stuff specifically to bring into, say, Adobe Premiere, which is a video program. Other than that, stay with ProPhoto RGB. Again, TIFF or PSD does not matter. Bit depth, always same reason you'd go with the bigger color space, go with the biggest bit depth. Always go with the 16 bits. Resolution, don't ever touch this number. Nothing good will come of it. Leave it alone. It's irrelevant. It has going to have no effect on your file. The reason for 240, people wonder why it is, because everybody says, oh, what resolution do you need for print? I need 300 DPI, which you don't, by the way. Why is Lightroom 240? Well, Adobe was friendly with Epson. And they asked Epson, what is the highest resolution you can maintain on a glossy paper? And they told them, they said 200, you can't see anything above 240 DPI because the ink flows a little bit when it hits the paper. So that's how 240 became the default resolution for Lightroom. Now, that you, who was it that mentioned? You mentioned that you were on a workshop with John Paul Caponegro. I know John Paul, I've known him for years. And John, he is extremely technical if you go there with him. And we've had conversations about these things to make sure we're both on the same page, and we are. So my other external editor, you can pick, well, if there's another program you like to edit in, you can see I have everything I have on my computer right now. It would be Viveza, but I will probably add, I have the new On1 Raw program. I will probably add that in here. But for my external editor, it's Viveza. Again, I can send it to JPEGs. I wouldn't do that. TIFF or PSD again, that's fine. Color space, I don't know how that got set for sRGB. That should be ProPhoto RGB. Again, 16:240, compression, none. Stack with original, meaning do you want it to come over top when it saves it back into Lightroom? Do you want it to stack over top of the one you just did? Well, no, I want you to just put it next to it. So I don't know how that happened. And then you can also, you have these templates. Remember about our names. So if you want to have a name that changes because you edit it in one of these programs, you can do that. I do that on import, so I don't need to mess with that. So that's what all this stuff means. And we'll take a look at the exporting dialog box before we finish tonight, because there's some things you need to know there. But this is where you set your preferences in Lightroom. Was there something else before we get to this editing part? Okay, nothing in the chat that is, oh, teeth. We'll do teeth after this. We'll do a portrait edit after this. Okay, so this is a 4-shot panoramic that was, I don't know why I did this handheld. I had a tripod with me. For some reason, I did this one handheld. Maybe it was a test. I don't know. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see they're screwed up. I don't know what I was thinking. You can see that one's angled differently than that one. And then there and there. And that one's got a lot more underneath. So that's a problem. Now they have been edited. You can see all the defaults have been done. When I edit in Lightroom for a panoramic, I will try to typically take one of the images in the middle, do my edit. In fact, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to reset this one. And you can see where they started, reset that. And I'll reset that one. And let's see, I see there's anything here I want to change while I'm at it. Maybe I'll add a little dehaze to it. I didn't do that. I'll bring up the shadows a little more. And do I have a profile for this? Yeah, let's do our profile. I actually don't like what the profile did to it in this case because it lost contrast. Oh, that looks a lot better. There we go. All right, so now I've got my image edited the way I want for my starting point anyway. So now I can shift or I command click. Command shift, get that, command shift. And there's the 4 images, which if I hit G, which will show me the grid, there's the 4 images that are going to make up this pano. But now I have to sync this one to the others. So it will take on all the same characteristics. So I click on sync. Why did it do that? Because I'm in library. Got to go to develop for that. Click on sync and I want everything. Just do everything I did to that one file to all of them. And now all 4 of the frames have the same edit to them. That's great. Now we need to put them together. So with all 4 of them selected, I go up to photo, photo merge, panorama. Now there are 3 choices: spherical, cylindrical, perspective. And you can see that's what happens when you handhold a pano shot. It's just a mess. Well, you can see that the building is skewed a little bit. Let's see what happens. Spherical compresses vertically a little bit. Typically don't want that with mountains. Let's see how cylindrical looks. And see, it's just a little bit taller. Just for giggles, let's see what perspective does, because there is a building in it. It might actually work better with the building. And isn't that kind of interesting? It straightened the building, but everything else got kind of weird. We have these big holes. Well, there are 2 ways to fix this. 2 ways to deal with it. One, I could just hit auto crop and there's what it leaves me. And that's fine if that's the kind of image you want to go with. I'm going to undo that though. Turn that off. The other one is boundary warp, where it's basically going to stretch the image to fill the white parts. And this is going to get weird because of those shapes of these weird holes. Strangely enough, it's not terrible, but if you look right here, this thing has gotten distorted. This little bridge across, it's got bent in order to fill in that hole. So let's undo that. Here's the new one. This is the new one that's pretty amazing. It's called Fill Edges. And basically, it's a giant content-aware fill. Let's see how it does. It's going to have to make up stuff to put in the white parts. And look what it just did. How amazing is that? Now, yeah, it didn't carry these clouds over. They'd have to be edited anyway. I don't like these contrails. They're going to go in Photoshop. But look at the foreground. It actually did an amazing job of fixing that. So let's go with it. It had to make this all up. Is anyone else blown away by that? I think it's just remarkable. So let's hit merge. And it will take all 4 of our images with the fill. It's going to calculate the fill for real. And it will send it off into this image. And let's see what it comes up with. Almost there. Up there, it's done. Right. I just put it in between these two. And there's our image. Let's give ourselves some more screen real estate by hiding the left-hand side. And if we zoom in, are there any repeating artifacts that we can see? Maybe a little bit right here. You see how this kind of looks? You see this bit of leaves right here is the same as these leaves right here, and almost the same as these leaves right here. But you'd have to go looking for that for it to really show up. So it's actually pretty impressive what it was able to do. Other times you're going to see that's going to be more of a violent reaction, like you'll see in Photo Friday tomorrow if you watch the video. So here we have this lovely image. This is sunrise in Grand Teton. And the barn, because of the focal length and the mountains, looks a little squat to me. Just the angle and the focal length. The grass is kind of big. So I'm going to cheat and try to bring that back a little bit. We did this the other night. I'm going to go to transform and aspect ratio, and I'm going to make the whole thing a little bit squishier, a little taller, because in my mind's eye, I've been to this barn 20 times. And I remember it as being a little bit taller, something more like that. It's not a huge amount, but just a little bit. Now I can either crop this or I can scale it. There's no reason to keep those white parts. So let's just crop on either side and get rid of that. All right. So what does the image need? This needs some Photoshop editing, which we're not going to go into tonight. I'll save that. We can try it. We'll see if we'll see what Lightroom can do, but I kind of already know this is going to require Photoshop. But let's look at the composition. So this tree is over here, which is interesting. I put the barn on the right because that tree was there. And this forms both a physical and a visual block that keeps you from leaving the image. However, it is so big and strong that it's bigger than the barn in the mountains. So we do need to do some cropping. So I'm going to cut to the chase for now. And I'm going to crop what I think the image needs. And I'm going to put my horizon line at the base of the barn. And I think that's going to work a little bit better. Now, do I need all of this light over here? Not sure. We'll deal with that later. What do we need to do? Well, the sky is off, but do we want to edit the sky or do we want to fix it first? Let's see what Lightroom can do. I typically would not attempt what I'm about to show you in Lightroom. This is something that to me would be reserved for Photoshop, but let's see how good a job it can do. Let's go up to the healing tools. Now, the healing tool, the normal one, which is called heal, which looks like a Band-Aid, is great for getting rid of spots. In fact, if I click here, in fact, I'm going to click here, hold down the shift button and click here. And yeah, can you, it really didn't work. You can see there's variations through here and I don't like it. So let's undo that. Let's get rid of the little one up top. That'll be easier. So I'm just going to click and drag and follow it along for a while. And that worked. The whole thing with a lot of these edits, and you'll find it'll be the same thing with content aware fill in Photoshop. That was a complete fail. Where the heck did it sample that it got leaves from? Now, why are you not seeing where I'm sampling from? Because I have it hidden, and that's with the H key. You toggle the H key and it lets you show your healing stuff. And you can see for some reason it decided to sample from over here and it picked up that leaf. So you can click on that and drag it to somewhere else that makes more sense for it to sample from. And I'll choose that. It's still pretty much a complete fail. So let's just hit enter on those. Let's try one of the other tools. This is the cloning tool. It's going to take an actual exact copy of another part of the image. Well, depending on where we go, we might be able to get away with it. I'm also going to turn the feather way down, almost to 0, because I'm going to get close to the mountain here. So let's go right into there, get this piece. In fact, I'm going to come all the way up to there. And that worked. Why? Because it's a clone. It picked up from over here. So let's hit enter on that. That worked. So that in this particular spot at the time worked. Now, also notice I want to continue working on this area, but if I go to use my tool again, I can't because this previous one's in the way. So that's where putting the H key into work comes. When you hold the H key, it basically now ignores any previous repairs. And does that work? Yeah, that's okay. We have a problem here. We've got a cloud coming through here. I don't know what's going to happen. Let's find out. What happens if we draw there? I have to hit the H key to see. And let's see what happens if we have it. Because remember, it's doing an exact copy and it failed. Well, we don't have to redo it again. Let's see what happens if we change it to the heel from the clone. Does it do a better job? Let's bring up our feather a little bit. Set it for, yeah, it created kind of this weird nebulous thing. Really, the answer is this is too much for Lightroom to do. It's not going to work. I just wanted you to see the 3 healing tools. They work great for little stuff, but for something as big as those contrails, the answer is no. It's just not going to work. So in fact, I can turn them all off and there they are. So the answer for that is that's an edit for Photoshop. So let's hit our Z key to unzoom back out. What does need to be worked on? Well, the temperature on the mountains is off. It's great in the foreground because when this barn gets hit by the rising sun, the thing really does kind of glow that orangey yellow, but the mountains are off. So let's get a brush, K. Auto mask is on, and let's just go into the back here and drag across the peaks. The peaks, even though they get hit with a little bit of yellow right at sunrise, they pretty quickly lose that. And just the overall temperature of the image is off in the back distance. So something like that, we'll get the tip of that one. And notice that even though my brush is going way out into the sky, since the colors are different enough of the thing I'm clicking on, it's leaving the sky alone, even if I come up here. So let's fix the color. What's the problem? Well, it's too yellow. Let's go to blue. Better. They're a little too dark. Let's bring up the exposure a little bit. Yeah, that's a better color for the light gray. Now we need to, I'm going to darken the shadows and we're going to add some dehaze. That's what it needs. There's a little haze off into the distance. That's looking much better. Now, this stuff here is actually a sort of pine tree. So we need to address that separately. So let's hit K again. And now let's get smaller and let's just pick these areas here. Actually, even in this rock a little bit, it's still picked up a little bit of that orange. I want to bring a little bit of green back into those areas right there. So let's go to our color sliders. It needs a little green. Add some green. We'll add a little bit of blue, and I'm going to bring the exposure down a smidge. And in my mind's eye, that's what it looked like. And then lastly, the sky. Let's just deal with the overall sky. Again, the contrails and even this cloud here will have to be dealt with in Photoshop. but let's select the sky anyway. And let's make it a little darker. We'll make it a little bluer to start. A little bit of blue and a little bit of dehaze. Just a little bit. And yeah, I think I can live with that. Let's take a look at it at full screen. And cool place. And if we zoom in, way in, you can see that this image really is sharp everywhere. Let's take a look at the settings. If I hit the I key, that will show us. So you can see with the 4 horizontal images shot stitched together, this is now over 11,000 pixels across. And this was shot at 80th of a second, f14. So at 32 millimeters. So that's why the grass is sharp and the peaks are sharp, everything in between because of that f14. Would I do a sharpening on here? Yeah, I might save that for Photoshop, because I have more control over sharpening in Photoshop since I have to take it there anyway. If I didn't need to take it, I would just do my sharpening here. I would go to detail, click on sharpening, hold down the Alt key on my mask, and then slide over to something like that. But there is more advanced sharpening in Photoshop, which I'd only do if I had to go there anyway. What I can do, however, is I can send this into Viveza. So let's just do it for giggles. Edit in Viveza, because I showed you guys the other night what Viveza does with that little bit of structure and a little bit of contrast in Viveza. Just nobody, and just it's my opinion, but right now I don't think anybody does it better. As far, yes, that's lovely. Nobody does it better than these guys, the way their structure works. And if I just add structure there, I mean, look, done. It doesn't need saturation. That really doesn't need contrast either. Just by adding that structure, look at the difference before and after. It just adds that kind of clarity, like if you were wearing polarized sunglasses, that it would get rid of all of the haze near and far. And it just has a remarkable effect. And I would say probably 90% of the images I send out to get printed get run through Viveza so that I can have that structure. And look at that. Again, I've been to this place many times. I never get tired of seeing this place. That's why I'm going to really miss it this year. There's also good pizza in Jackson and coffee. All right, moving on. Any questions about that? Again, you'll see this demonstration again with a different kind of image tomorrow in Photo Friday, where there are some more severe problems using the fill edge. And then you have to wait till the following Friday to see how they're solved. So yeah, making you wait. Okay, let's go back. And in portraits, we got some teeth to deal with. I actually had problems finding people with teeth that were well, no, they had teeth, but teeth that were appropriate because they all have great teeth. And these are all I mean, look, this is an unedited image. This is just out of the camera. When you're in the studio, you have so much more control over color and light. This is an unedited image. If you look at the basic panel, you can see nothing's been done to this. This is just the raw file. And this is our friend Kendra, who is now a nurse. Yeah, we started working with her when she was what, 16? Yeah, she's like what, 23 now? Yeah, so we've known this girl a long time. And not a great subject for editing because she just makes it too easy. And her teeth are so good. So let's see if we can find somebody who doesn't have perfect teeth. And this is a shot taken with no flash. Obviously, the shot of Kendra was shot with flash. This is just an outdoor shot with no lighting. So let's see if we can fix the teeth. We can add some life into the eyes. And I think I have another one of the other models we deal with. Is she the one that has, yeah, she's got a little bit of red in her eyes. Let's see. No. Yeah, maybe a little bit. Again, with the models we've dealt with over the years, we've shot them many times. We know them well. Okay. Teeth. So how do you, the question was, how do you make teeth whiter, but make it look real? So let's get our brush, K. Auto mask is on, gonna make it nice and small, and I just need to select the teeth. And probably easiest to just click. Just keep clicking on the teeth until you get them. And if you get off a little bit, I will minus that. Now, the operations we're going to do are not really going to affect the skin around as much. So we can bring the exposure up, but that'll start to look weird really quickly. I mean, you see, you want to have glowing radioactive teeth. So I just want to bring it up a little bit. And it's actually a pretty simple answer. What makes teeth look yellow? Guess what? Yellow does. So let's add a little bit of blue to the teeth. And yeah, we could probably be done right there. The other thing I do like to do is take a little saturation out, because teeth should be kind of a fairly neutral color. And that looks like she has white teeth, but not supernatural white teeth. And if we toggle that on and off, there's the before and after. Don't we all wish our teeth looked like that? Much better. So as long as we're at it, let's finish up the rest of the face. So if we've got blemishes, this is one of the times that the healing tool works beautifully. This is a great tool in Lightroom. Just, I'm going to add some feather to it about halfway. Click on the Band-Aid, which is heal. Make the brush a little bit bigger. I can either use 2 fingers on my mouse, or if you just want to make like the next step up bigger or smaller, hit the left or right bracket key, and that'll make it go up in easy increments. And now it sampled from a spot I don't like. So I'm going to come over here because I want to do there as well. And just keep an eye on where it's sampling from. And I just want to get rid of any blemishes that show up. I don't want to make her look like a store mannequin, but I want to get any that are stronger. And yeah, again, I toggle left backslash key, and I can see, look at before and after. Lovely. And I had added some vibrance and saturation earlier. What else? The eyes. Her eyes are too much in shadow. So let's get K again. We're going to turn off auto mask because I want to get the entire kind of eye socket. So let's get in there and in here. And let's try bringing up the shadows. That looks a lot more natural. We can add a little bit more light in the eyes by bringing the exposure up. All right, we're getting there. I want to make the whites of her eyes a little brighter. Let's bring up our magnifier and go to the eyes. All right, you can see it's nice and sharp. We just want to add some light in there. And her eyes are, her whites are very clean, so we're not going to have to do anything there. Let's get K again. I'll click in there and in there. And there and there, I picked up a little bit underneath. So hold down the Alt key to change it to minus, just to get rid of that. And same thing, we'll bring up the exposure a little bit, just a smidge. And I'm going to add a little bit of blue. I think that's enough. Now I want to, because her eyes were in shadow, we lost the color of her eyes as well. So let's do that. K again. Auto mask is on. We want auto mask on. And let's just draw around the eye. Now, if it picks up some of the black part, that's okay, because that's not going to be affected. I did get outside a little bit. So again, hold down Alt and just make sure we get rid of the spots that are outside. And if you don't like the black part getting affected, then just do that. So what I want to do is I want to increase the saturation and exposure. Let's open it up a little bit. Let's increase the saturation, and it's still not working. We need to get the blue back into her eyes. So I can do it with the blue, but I don't like the direction it's going. I think it's because of the shadow she's in. So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to click on this box right here, which is under my brush controls. This allows me to add a color. So if I come over here and say, well, I want that, well, I can make it supernatural. It's just going to just get the right tone of blue, I think about there. And then I'm going to bring down the percentage just to add that tint back in to her eyes. And that looks good. Let's zoom out on that. And I'll hit H to get rid of our edits. And I maybe made the eyes a little too blue, but that's okay. But again, we can see before and after with the backslash key. Look at the difference on that. And again, this is to taste. If I was doing this for a final print, I'd probably make the teeth a little less bright. But again, if I go back to my masks, I have them all here. Here's all the stuff. Here's her teeth. So if I decide that was a little too much brightening, I'll just bring it down a little and make it a little more subtle. What else? Anything last I would do? Well, she's a young girl, but for those of us that are not in our 20s anymore, which from my looking on the Zoom screen is none of that going on. So I'm going to select the whole face with K. I want auto mask on. I'm going to give myself a nice big brush and I'm going to select her whole face. I don't care about her hands. I'm going to get her neck also. I don't want to get her eyes. Lips are optional. Might as well get them. And we're going to use a filter in Lightroom that I had mentioned was actually designed for portraits, and that's the texture slider. The texture slider was actually designed for smoothing skin. And if you come down about this much, it will smooth skin beautifully. And there we go. Now, cropping wise, do we need all this stuff on the left? Nope. Let's just cut to the chase. This is a portrait, so let's make it a portrait. So I'm thinking there, I don't really need her hand much in the bottom. Something like that. Hit enter. I'll add a vignette. And I'm not thrilled with the color temperature of the whole thing. The white balance is off. Let's add a little warmth back into it. Oh, as long as we're at it, let's finish the damned edit. Let's do her hair. With auto mask, I'm going to select her hair. I want to add a little bit more vibrance and sheen, as if she was one of those girls on the TV shampoo commercials. What will do that? The clarity slider. So let's go down to clarity. We'll add a bunch of clarity and texture, and then we need to bring the exposure up because clarity darkens. And then bring the exposure up. And now we've got separation between the highlights and the dark parts of her hair. We can add some saturation back in as well. And with her face mask also, I think her face is a little too yellow now. Let's cut out some of the yellow. And by the way, there are software programs that are designed to do this AI-like. So it depends. It's up to you. Add a little bit of red in. It's up to you if you want to do it manually or use the programs. All right. But again, if we consider that's what we started with, and there we are. Is it overdone? Honestly, it is. But I just wanted to show you the processes rather than would I do it? I'd probably bring the eyes down a little bit. And one more thing. M, linear gradient. Let's take down the highlights. And I'm actually going to darken a little bit of the bottom. Why? Just to focus again on her face a little bit more. And there we go. So we started there and we turned it to there. All right. Any more questions about portrait edits? Anybody in there? Okay. Holy cow, it's 8:51. Let's go back to all right, well, let's get out of the portraits. Oh, this is a friend of mine, Juliana. I photographed her for years also. She's now working as what is it? Red Bull?
Yeah.
She's working on the Red Bull dance team. She's had a lot of success. She's a nice girl. Okay. Let's take a look at this. This is a difficult photograph because I don't have any reference to how tall this canyon is. This is looking down into part of the canyon at Black Canyon of the Gunnison. And the reason it's called Black Canyon is from here, this is the north end rim right there. Those are decent sized trees, by the way. From there down to the river down here, which is the Gunnison River, that's where it gets its name, in some places is 2,000 feet. So if you can kind of comprehend what that must look like, it's an amazing, first time I saw it, I was just overawed. But you don't have really a reference. It would have been cool if I had somebody standing down here, but not possible. So let's go through our develop. How can we bring the life and kind of the awe back to this scene? And the sun was shining. And it's called the Black Canyon, by the way, because the bottom parts of the canyon, it's so, you can see the walls are so steep. The bottom parts of the canyon only get sunlight a maximum of about 30 minutes a day. That's it. The rest of the time, it just gets black down there. So shadows, let's bring the highlights down because I need to be able to open up the exposure on this, and because we need to put in our contrasts and our color again. All right, we're getting there. Color temperature's gone off. Do I have a profile for this scene? I do. I shot this with the XS10. And look what just happened. Look at the sky. That's where we were. See how it's kind of got that cyan tint to it? We do our custom profile, and now it's a real looking sky. So I want to emphasize the depth of this thing. And to do that, we're going to have to crop this really thin. But before we do that, we need to really show that it gets dark down bottom and it gets light when where the sun hits. So I just added a whole bunch of contrast because that's more what this thing's going to look like. And now you're getting to see this is the spot the sun is hitting. But remember, when our camera takes a picture, it only has one color temperature it can deal with. We got two here. The sun is hitting right here. So what's that going to do? It's going to make it more yellow. So let's get a brush. Get our brush. Do I want auto mask? No. I'm just going to use I'm not going to use auto mask. I got to turn it off because see what it did? It misses pieces. I just want to paint through this whole thing that I see as being hit with sun. This, by the way, we'll deal with separately. I will turn on auto mask now to add some of these little spots on either side and underneath. So now let's add some yellow back into here. Not that much, but, and we add some warmth too. And again, I'm going from my recollection. And one thing I recommend to everybody when you're out shooting a place like this is put your camera down before you leave and stare at the place so that it kind of burns into your memory what the place looked like, because your camera is going to do a lousy job of capturing the colors. You need to do that yourself. Now I'm going to add a little bit up here, but I'm going to bring down the flow because I want to add a little bit of light gently up here. And it seems to be a little over here too as well. All right, now the plateau up top is missing out. So let's hit K and auto mask is on, and let's select up here. And this, again, I had the flow turned down. I want to bring up the brightness a little bit there because I'm going to add some clarity and dehaze there. There we go, much better. So now as we're looking at the scene, now I'm getting a sense of the place. This is a little bit of a distraction. Yes, it was there, no way around that. But let's hit K to create a new brush. Let's turn on auto mask if it's off. Oh, it's on. Let's bring the flow back up. And I'm going to select these rocks that were right at my feet. And yes, they were right at my feet. That's one thing. If you're afraid of heights, you may not want to go here. Because, Diane, what did you feel about this place? Do you have any problems? Okay. There are places where there are fences to look over, but there are also places where you can just peer right over the edge and there's nothing there. So if that freaks you out, then consider yourself warned. So I'm going to bring the exposure down to that just to help us get there. All right. So we need a vignette. Let's go to our effects vignette. And I may want to bring up the overall exposure, but I'm not sure yet. But I first have to figure out my final crop. As the image is here right now, there's too much that is taking away from this centerpiece here. So let's get the crop. I have panoramics of this place that are horizontal. In fact, I'll show you one next, but I'm thinking something like this, because what it does is it shares with you the verticality of this place. I'm going to bring up the exposure a little more, add a little more contrast, and put a little more into the blacks. Add some vibrance too, a little more saturation. All right. So I'm going to create a virtual copy of that so I can reset it. I want you to see where we started. Again, to try to tell the story. This is a difficult thing to do in a place like this, to try to be able to explain the immensity. And the only reference you have are the trees that are here. These are decent sized trees. So you get a little sense of the place. But by adding our crop and showing where the sun is hitting, I think I made the trees a little too green. I'll fix that in a second. But just to show you now, what happens is your eye has a place to go because the place that's getting hit by the sun is brighter. I'd probably darken that as well a little bit and take a little green out. That's the beauty of looking at these things with nothing else around it. Because once you see it here, then you see, okay, this is when I need to fine tune. So let's get HSL. I'm going to turn down the saturation of this green. There's something about like that. That looks better. And I'm going to turn down the luminance right in here, just a smidge. And I think that looks better, but I'm going to make myself a little stronger vignette. Oh, by the way, something I haven't shown you about the vignette. I forgot. I'm going to make the vignette 100% just so you can see it. That's the shape of the vignette. We didn't talk about these three sliders underneath. The midpoint, I can make the vignette go closer to the edge or come really close into the middle. I'm going to make it a little bit more like that. The roundness is self-explanatory, but you can't really see it unless you have your vignette set at 100%. So if I make it all the way to the left, it just touches the edges. All the way in, it turns into a circle. So I'm going to send it a little bit more to the edges, something about like that. And then feather is how far is it going to come in? If I do no feather, you get that, which is interesting, but not what we're after. If I go that way, it gradually fades all around. I'm going to kind of cut the difference on the top side, and then I will bring back the amount to my more normal. I'm going to do a little heavier. I'll do about 18 or so. I'll do 22. But that's how you can actually see what's going on with the vignette. And now when we look at that full screen, much happier with the color and much happier with how the image looks. And that looks like fun. That's Black Canyon of the Gunnison. But while we're here, I can't leave this go. I want you to see what Viveza can do to this just by adding some of the structure. And I wish I had some kind of financial arrangement with the people from Nick, but I do not. But get the Nick filters. If you're doing landscape photography, you just for this structure slider. Oh, and by the way, while we're here, we lost kind of the saturation in the blue. So you can do local stuff in Viveza also with these control points. So let's come up control point, click in the sky, and then it brings us down here. And I'm going to add saturation back into the sky, make it a little bit bluer. I'm going to turn down the brightness of tint, and I'm going to add a little warmth to it. Now I'm going to add some blue to it. Now that only did around this circle. So what I can do is just do that, which will capture the whole thing. And then on top of that, if I want to dehaze this mountain right here, I'll make the area that it's influencing a little less. And I will add a bunch of structure just to that little mountain there and darken it up. Didn't appear. I guess I made the area a little too small. Let's make it a little bigger. Come on. There we go. And if you like the way it is dealing with a certain place, and you can move it around, it'll affect the image differently. Hold down the Alt key and drag, and it'll take a copy of the one you just did and get rid of it so you can see the before and after. And in fact, I want another one. Hold down the Alt key, I'll drag into there. And there we go. And there's the before after, and you can just see how it's added that last little bit of pop. So do yourself a favor and get the Nick filters. I think it's $149 for them, and you get 8 different filters, of which you're going to use half of them. All right, so again, we went from here with our raw file to there. Now that the eye has a clear starting spot from here, and since this is such a vertical shot, you will then follow up and take a look, and you can actually see the road coming in from the other side. So, which I hadn't noticed before, and it gives you a little bit more sense of scale. All right. Wow, it's already after 9. You guys got time for one more? Yes, no? Thumbs up, yes? You can stay? Okay. What did I not get to that I wanted to share with you? Oh, there's a lot, but oh, yes. Let's do this one. This is a waterfall, but this is just to show you what you can repair. All right. So you would think there's no saving this thing. And this is a little waterfall. Actually, I showed you Dingman's Falls before. In fact, that was the first image we worked on. This is another waterfall there called Silver Thread, I think. Yeah, Silver Thread. And if we go to develop, and you look at the histogram, well, why did I shoot it so dark? Well, I had to protect the highlights. I needed to have the waterfall. Now, of course, the waterfall was getting a little sun on it, but I couldn't have it blow out. But strangely enough, when I come over in here, which looks solid black, look at the numbers underneath the histogram. There are numbers there. If it was solid black, it would be all zeros, and this triangle would be lit up in blue. It's not, it's lit up in gray, which is telling me that all of those places are getting really close to black, but they're not there yet. So that means it can be recovered. So let's do it. I'm going to bring the highlights way down because I need to bring the overall exposure way up. And I'm going to bring the highlights down even a little more and bring the exposure up, and look at that. It was all there. Isn't that remarkable? This is the beauty of Lightroom. Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw are actually pretty much the same software, but the virtual copies and some of the other things Lightroom does just make it easier. So real quick, I'm going to add saturation and vibrance. Even the color temperature is pretty good. We'll add some clarity. Oh, what else does it need? The green's a little off. It's a little too green. Let's add a little magenta maybe. And just a little bit more warmth, a little bit of yellow. And it needs more saturation. All right, we're going to go saturated on that. Now, here's the other half. This was a 2-shot stitch. So all I need to do is select them both and go to sync. And I want it to do everything that I just did on the left side. Let's see if that works. No, it doesn't. Interesting. Apparently the in between time I was taking that, the exposure of the sun changed or moved through a cloud or something. So I have to bring it back down to match this one. So now I have my 2 shots. You can see they're both selected. Come up to photo merge, panorama. Even though it's 2 shots, it's still a panorama. And that's odd that it made it darker. I don't know why it did that. Do we need to bother with boundary warp or anything filling in here? Honestly, no. I'm just going to hit auto crop. There's nothing in there I need. So let me click on merge. And let's see what it presents with us. I think there was a software fail there for a second because for some reason it made the thing go darker. That's really odd. I don't know what that's all about. Let's bring our exposure back up. Huh. Don't know what happened there. That was a weird software thing. And let's hit R. And let's look. I've got the waterfall dead center here. That doesn't work. That's because it's not a centered symmetrical kind of thing. So let's bring the crop in from the left, get the waterfall near one of our guidelines. And let's live with that because I want to talk about exporting. I'll add a little vignette and we'll do a sharpening on this as well. So let's add a bunch of sharpening. Hold down Alt on the masking slider and bring it over so just our edges get sharpened. And again, when you think, I'll make a virtual copy of the stitch. If I hit reset, that's what that's what we started with. And there's where we ended up as it continues to draw it in. Come on, draw. There we go. It drew it in. And it's remarkable how little noise there is in here when you think about how dark this area was when we brought it in. So pretty amazing. But now let's imagine we want to send this thing out to print. So what do? Let's take a look at file export in Lightroom. So let's click on export and see what the choices are. Oh, it always goes to color checker if you ever use the thing. We're just going to send it to our hard drive to a place that we can send it, upload it to our lab. So I'm going to have it exported to the desktop and I'm going to create a subfolder called for the lab. And existing size. I love how they all caps without warning. No, just ask me what to do. File naming. Do you want it to have a different name? And if you click on this, you have different options. You have a file name. You have the same things we did when we imported the custom name with original file number. What I will typically do is I will choose custom name with original file number again. But since it's going out to a lab, I will put my name on it. And if I want, I can do option G, which is copyright. And I'll put Joe Brady. And it will add that to the beginning of each file. This is a nice safety feature if you're sending out to a lab and they're having trouble finding your files. Go ahead and put your name in there, and then every image that you get sent will have that. Video doesn't apply. We're not dealing with a video. File settings. So if we click on here, we have all of these options. This is between you and the lab. You need to talk to them and see what they want. If you're having a conventional photo print made, just going out to a lab printer, they generally want an sRGB JPEG. Typically, that's what they ask for. So if I'm going out to a lab, I'll go to JPEG and there's sRGB, it defaults to. If I'm going to have a large format inkjet print made, then it would be a TIFF, and they typically ask for Adobe RGB for those. So these choices here are just whatever your lab asks for the printer they're using. Always 16 bits if it supports, don't compress it. Again, if you're going out to the lab, just to a regular photo printer, and quality, always leave it at 100. There's no reason to reduce your quality when you're sending a file to the lab. So there's your two choices: photo print, JPEG, big inkjet, TIFF, Adobe RGB. Image sizing. In general, you don't want to touch this. Leave it alone. You've got so many pixels. You know how big a print you want, and hold that thought for a second. Output sharpening. We already did our sharpening, so there's no reason to sharpen again. Metadata, yeah, whatever. Do I want to remove the person info and location? No, who cares? It's just going to say where the thing was taken and what camera it was and who did it. Watermarking. I know a lot of people like to watermark stuff when they put it up on social media. That's fine if you want to do it. You're not going to do that for a print. If you wanted to watermark your own stuff, I have a couple here. Here's my 2023 one. And if I were to create a new, let's say I wanted to edit watermarks, you then have the option. You can see it right here. Where is it going to go? How big is it going to be? So for example, if I wanted it bigger, well, I can change the size to make it bigger here. I can put it on the lower left-hand corner, and then I can tell it how far do I want to inset it from the bottom and the left side. Again, I'm not going to watermark this, but if you needed to watermark or wanted to watermark images, that's where you do it. So we're not going to watermark. Post-processing, no, there's a good rule to follow. Do nothing. Just after you're done, just go have a drink. So this file is now ready to be sent out to a lab to have a large format inkjet print. This file is set to go out to a lab for a regular photo print. So let's say I'm going to go regular photo print for this. Again, don't mess with image sizing. And here's why. So I'm going to go ahead and export that. and it's going to export. Oh, it's actually exporting both of them because I had them both set. It's going to do the black one too. What did I want to? I just had a brain freeze. What was I going to show about the exporting? Image size. Thank you. All right. So image size, let's take a look at this. So these two shots together, what was this shot with? This was shot with the Fuji XS10. These two shots, when stitched together and then we cropped them, ended up being 7,013 pixels across. So what does that mean? How big a print can I make from this? If you want to stick to the 240 number, which you do not need to do, by the way, but if you wanted to, you want to play it really conservative. 7013 divided by 240 means you can print this at 29.22 inches, so 30 inches across. Do you really need 240 for your prints? Not for an image like this. If you have something with really hard edges, something with a lot of text in it, like maybe a building with signs and things, then maybe you want 240. But for non-continuous tone stuff like this, you cannot see the difference, but for anything 150 dots per inch or over. In fact, if you've ever had a canvas print made, they're all printed at 150. That's the default. So if I do 7013 divided by 150, all of a sudden this becomes a 47-inch print, which means 48 inches. I could make a 4-foot wide print on this and it would look perfectly fine. So just understand that. The cutoff is about 125. Anything below 125 starts to look a little bit fuzzy. But even at 125, it's really hard with the unaided eye. You know, if you look at a magnifying glass, maybe, but with your unaided eyes, even corrected, you really can't see the difference between anything from 125 DPI up. So that's why you don't mess with that 240 number. It means nothing when you're exporting the file, and they really should just get rid of it. The only reason you would do that is if you're making something, say, for the web, and you're making a banner for your Facebook page, and it has to be so many pixels across, then fine. But other than that, no, there's no reason for you, unless you're going to downsize something for a reason like that. Don't ever mess with the resolution. The lab printers know how to deal with that. You tell them, all right, I've got this image. I want a 30-inch print of it. You're done. They will take care of it from there. There is more to this. There's soft proofing. You can see there's actually a soft proofing thing called down here. That is a whole nother world of dealing with color, where we have to go into profiles and rendering intents and things like that. One of these days, I will record an entire course on that. I'm actually teaching a class on this at the Florida Photo and Birding and Photo Fest in April. I will have a 3 or 4 hour class just on how to deal with digital color workflow. Too much for tonight, though. Any questions? Where's my question person? No questions, guys, because it's like 9:15. Anybody have any questions? You can unmute if you want.
No questions. Thank you.
No questions. Nobody? All right. Was there anything I missed that you really wanted to cover? I got teeth. I got teeth taken care of for Renee. We did birds. We did lighthouses. We did mountains. Yeah, we covered a lot. No?
Thank you,
No?
Chair.
Could I ask one more question?
There we go. Go ahead.
Okay, this is back to profiling.
Okay.
So do you have a profile for each camera, one for shade and one for sun, or do you do it for the area
Okay.
with the color checker?
Yep. All right. So here's the difference. I do have one for when I'm out west. And the reason for that is that if you're out in the desert Southwest, it's very dry out there. So what that means is there's no moisture in the air. That affects the sky. And if you've ever been out there as an Easterner or a Southerner, or any either the coast or in the South, where you have a lot more humidity, the blue sky out in Arizona and Utah is supernatural to you. You're not used to it. It even looks wrong because there's the red component is back in the air because there's no moisture to absorb it. On the coast or any place where there is humidity, there's water in the air. And if any of you have ever tried to take pictures underwater, the first color that gets absorbed by water is red. So the red component of the blue gets taken out and it makes the blues look paler. So if I want to maintain that, I will have a profile for both out west and for the East Coast. I will typically do one for cloudy too. When I was shooting a lot of weddings, which I don't do anymore, a lot of times you'd incorporate mixed lighting where I'd have maybe a tungsten light and daylight or LEDs or what have you. In that case, I would always profile those specific lights. And when I'm in the studio, when I'm downstairs shooting portraits with studio lights, I have a profile for that. And you also have to have one for each camera model that's different. So if I have, 5 different Fuji XS10 bodies, they're all the same. They don't matter. But if I have a Canon and a Nikon and it's Fuji and a Sony, they need their own profiles, because if I go to an older image that was shot with a different camera. So for example, when we went in basic, you can see the XS10 daylight shade shows up. I can apply that because this was shot with that camera. But if I let me go to the library and let's bring up my thing here. I'm going to go I'm going to go under metadata and say, okay, here are Sony cameras. So I'll take the A7R3, which is that camera right there. So here's an image that was shot with the A7R3. Oh, that's a JPEG. Let's get here's the raw. If I go to the develop module now and choose Adobe Color, notice that profile is missing because the profiles are tied to the specific camera, but the profile checks the metadata to see what camera captured the image because the profiles are specific to the camera. Clear on that?
I think that clears it up somewhat.
Okay.
Because
Really?
when I was in Moab, I took a picture of the color checker at Arches, and then again I thought, well, I have to do it again the next day at Canyonland.
No,
I didn't really have to do that, did I?
No, you didn't.
Okay.
It didn't hurt anything. It's not like you wasted film doing it.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot.
Oh, my pleasure. Any other questions before we call it a night? No? All right.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. It's
I
good.
thank you all so much for joining me. I will be working on the edits. We have Photoshop next Wednesday and Thursday, and I plan on having the recordings for all 4 evenings for you by no later than the Saturday after that. If I can get my act together, I will try to get the Lightroom ones done before the Photoshop classes start.
Next class will start.
Worst case, they'll be ready. The recordings will be ready for you a week from Saturday after we finish Photoshop. All right. So that's it for tonight. I thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I know this was a lot, and that's the benefit of having the recordings, because you guys can just stop and start and skip the stuff you're not interested in and zero in on the stuff you are. So again, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. And I hope to see you online again soon. In fact, I hope to see you guys live one of these days before too long. So until then, hey, everybody be well and see you soon.
Okay, thanks. Good night now.
Good night.